is September 19th, 2025, and the European Union is announcing their 19th, if you can believe it, package of sanctions against Russia. But this time, they say that they're adding in some entities from countries like China and India because they're going along with the latest orders coming from the US saying that Europe really needs to ramp up their pressure, not just on Russia, but also on the countries that continue to work with Russia, as if that's going to make any difference. So, what does all of this mean for the state of NATO's ongoing proxy war against Russia in Ukraine? And what should we be keeping an eye on? Well, we got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Jim Jatras, a geopolitical analyst and former U.S. diplomat. Jim, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Rachel, thank you for having me on. It's always a great pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, it's always great to have you on the show. Now, I want to get your take on the latest here, as I know that President Trump is really putting the pressure on his fellow NATO allies to stop buying Russian oil, claiming this week that, quote, if the price of oil comes down, Putin is going to just drop out. He's going to have no choice. He's going to drop out of that war. All right, clearly he doesn't understand the Ukraine war, or maybe isn't claiming to, but Russia has already shown that even if they're not selling as much oil to the West, they're going to sell it to the East, right? They're going to sell it to all of these other countries like China and India. So, what do you make of Trump's sort of latest fixation here?
You know, Rachel, when Trump says clearly dumb stuff, you really do wonder, does he just not know any better? Is this what he's being told by his advisors? Or is he just saying this for effect? I mean, we seem to be in kind of a little of a zitzkrieg here right now, where all the players, it's not like nothing is happening, but all the players are sort of moving sideways to try to figure out what their next move is going to be. And I think that's particularly true in Trump's case, because he really has no path forward. Unless he really wants to dig down and get us even more involved in the war in Ukraine, which now, he's really running out of options for that. He can't just send more money and weapons. I mean, he's trying to do that, but we really don't have it. And that's really not going to make any impact anyway. His sanctions policy toward India and China has come completely to a halt. He's basically now telling the European Union, okay, I'm calling your bluff unless you put the sanctions on India and China. I'm not going to do any more. Meanwhile, the Europeans are going through the motion saying, well, okay, we'll speed up our getting rid of Russian LNG. And we really aren't talking about oil right now, but we're going to lower that price cap, which of course won't do any good. And meanwhile, they're trying to talk about no-fly zones or reassurance forces and all this other sort of thing. None of this seems to be going much of anywhere. Meanwhile, it seems that the Russians, they're keeping up the steady pressure. And, despite what a lot of other people are saying, and I don't mean to beat the dead horse here, I don't think the Russians are intending to win this thing militarily, but rather they I think, are still stuck on the idea that they can keep up the pressure and the West runs out of options and the Ukrainian army collapses, sooner or later, somebody's going to come to the table and sign an agreement with them. I'm not going to beat that dead horse. I think it's a very bad strategy on their part, but that seems to be what they're doing right now. So basically, everybody's sort of scuttling around like crabs sideways without clearly moving forward in a way that's going to bring this thing to a head. My fear is that given the kind of irresponsible people, how many monkeys with hand grenades can you count in Western capitals, that something bad is going to happen. That's why we look at this drone situation with Poland or Romania, where, obviously the Polish one was an effort by the Ukrainians to stage some sort of provocation that would get more direct NATO involvement in Ukraine. That doesn't seem to be working. The Americans don't seem to be taking the bait. Meanwhile, you have Keith Kellogg over there in Kiev, somewhere in Ukraine, saying the dumbest possible thing about how Russia's losing this war, and it's really hard to see how this thing is moving toward some sort of a resolution that doesn't run the risk of something untoward, unexpected, unplanned taking place that raises the escalation level uncontrollably, and that's my concern right now.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you bring that up because I think that that is a very big concern. And exactly as you're noting there, we saw this with Poland, we saw these claims with Romania, and that really raises the fear level that there's going to be some sort of a false flag attack, some sort of a claim. And it doesn't matter what Russia claimed, right? Russia can come out and say exactly as they did, hey, you're making these claims, present us a shred of evidence. That clearly didn't happen in either of these two cases, but it doesn't mean that there couldn't be a new version of this where something happens just over the border in Poland. And now all of a sudden you have NATO coming together, talking seriously about Article 5, and then getting more and more involved in this direct proxy war against Russia. So when it comes to your concerns for that, even though, NATO doesn't have the weapons, right? They don't have the ability. They do not want to get further into this war. And yet they continue to grandstand and to act as though they do. So what does that tell you about what they could be getting ready to get further into?
I wish I knew, Rachel. As I say, I think the key to this is Trump trying to figure out some way. I don't think he's trying to figure out how to disengage because he can't. It should be evident to everybody he cannot disengage. That in terms of the machinery of the American state and how it acts in various places around the world, I don't think he's in control of it. I don't even think he knows most of what we're actually doing with respect to Ukraine. We did not only have the incidents with Poland and Romania, which we can discuss if you want to. We also had a report, I think just today, about some Russian jets allegedly violating Estonian airspace. They can call for consultations on the NATO side. The question is, what are they going to do? Well, you got to look at the flavor of the month here. I mean, for a few weeks ago, it was ceasefire. That didn't go anywhere. So then it was a stabilization force, U.S. backing for some kind of a peace force on the ground, even though there was no peace to police, and now it's a no-fly zone over Ukraine. That's the newest thing that they're all beating the drum on, based on these incidents. Again, I think they keep trying to find something that will work, that will cause the Russians to take a step back and give them the opportunity to put some kind of force in Ukraine, whatever that looks like. I don't think they necessarily need a peace agreement to do that. I think what they need is some kind of a political circumstance, some sort of law that will allow them to put in some kind of force under a British or French flag and dare the Russians to hit it. And, of course, a lot of people who are more sympathetic to the Russian point of view say, well, absolutely, the Russians will crush that. I'm not so sure. I mean, we do know that a lot of NATO personnel have been killed, that have been there embedded with the Ukrainian forces, but not in uniform, not as official declared forces of those countries. I think the Russians would think twice about killing a bunch of Frenchmen in French uniforms or British under their own flag. Again, not covered by Article 5. That's the claim they're all giving. But I think the Russians would take some pause at that. And that, I think, is the thing they're trying to find some way to finesse. Is there some way we can slip these guys in so that they're there overtly and the Russians don't hit them? I think that's where we are right now. In the meantime, the Russians will continue just killing lots of Ukrainian soldiers.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point too, because I do kind of wonder, as we, watch the statements that Russia has made, watch even the movement that they have made, the targets there. Yeah, there's that question. If you have NATO sending official troops in, claiming that they're peacekeepers, then what kind of a position does that put Russia in? Because of course, what NATO wants is they want them to kill those troops, right? They want to be able to say, oh, we sent these French quote unquote peacekeepers in and they were massacred by the Russians. And then we just keep seeing this war escalate further and further. But when it comes back to what Russia has been saying, right, back to their security concerns, we have yet to see any evidence that NATO cares or really wants to work with Russia, right? Trump can say all day long that, oh, he wants to make some sort of a deal. He wants the killing to stop. But every action that we have seen from the NATO alliance has been, we want more and more war. And now you have, as you were pointing out before, this focus on, oh, we're going to hit third party countries, right? We're going to target them with sanctions because obviously the sanctions against Russia alone aren't doing the job. And now you have the EU essentially following orders from the US. You've got European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announcing on Friday that Chinese entities will be targeted in the EU's 19th sanctions package against Russia. We're literally at number 19. What does that tell you? Is this just about the PR battle at this point? Is there going to be any impact, do you think, by the EU now turning around and targeting some Chinese entities, at least in the when it comes to the oil traders, petrochemical companies in third countries that they're talking about?
Yeah, Chinese, and I believe also some Indian entities too. I mean, this is kind of the international economic equivalent of the ghost of Kiev. I mean, this is their idea that they can wave their magic wand and sound really tough and look like they're doing something, and when in fact this will have no impact on anything. Now they do run a risk with the Russians and excuse me with the Indians, especially with the Chinese, that they are also dependent on the Chinese for some very important components for what's left of their industry, just like President Trump found out when he tried to slap some severe sanctions and tariffs on China, and the Chinese said, "Fine, no more rare earth for you." And then what did that do to American industry, including our military industry? So I think they're walking a fine line too, where they want to pretend like they're doing something to appease Trump on the one side, but not really offend the Chinese and the Indians on the other side. And again, it's all smoke and mirrors. Meanwhile, the other thing Trump has to worry about is that with Congress coming back into session, that they're going to move Lindsey Graham's and Richard Blumenthal's sanctions bill from hell, and I think that's probably going to be passed because it will probably have very, very liberal waiver authority in it, where the president is empowered to do all sorts of stuff, but he doesn't have to do it. So he would have a real toolkit at his disposal to put more draconian sanctions on, pretty much everybody, which seems to be his style. So I think there are a lot of things that are percolating out there. I think we'll see them coming into fruition over the next few months. And of course, again, part of the desperation for Trump to try to find some way to shift this burden onto the Europeans is that I think a lot of people are expecting the war with Israel and Iran to heat back up. And really, that's a war between the United States and Iran as well. And, we can't walk and chew gum at the same time. We really don't want to be in a position where we've got the primary responsibility for the Ukraine war and then also are fighting a war with Iran in circumstances that might even more easily go nuclear before any kind of confrontation in Ukraine does.
Yeah, that's a big factor there. And I'm with you. I think that the US establishment, right, that they are keeping an eye on Iran, that they're moving more towards that, and they want that to be what their focus is on. And then at the same time, they still have to deal with Ukraine. And, as we're watching and as you have the US putting this pressure on Europe to say, oh, you take over the responsibility, right? You take the reins for the proxy war against Russia. You have Ukraine in this spot where the Ukrainian military can only go so far, right? They can only do so much, especially as you do have Russia ramping up these drone attacks on a near nightly basis. Russian drone production is just insane at this point. And so because of that, you have Ukraine in this position where I'm wondering how long they're going to be able to last as a legitimate fighting force, and at what point you're going to have Europe trying to rush in there and keep everything from falling apart. Is that something that you're concerned about as you're kind of watching NATO still trying to make sure that this is a viable proxy war?
Absolutely. And that's where the ball is back in the Russian court. I mean, a lot of people point out, and I think it will happen eventually, we don't know when, that we will see a severe crack in the Ukrainian armed forces. And then the ball's back in Moscow's court. What are they going to do about it? Remember, a few weeks ago, we saw near Pokrovsk a kind of a breakthrough between the Ukrainian lines where the Russians wasn't a big aero offensive, as people keep talking about, but it was a very significant breach and a significant Russian advance. And some people are asking, is this the beginning of the end? Well, evidently it wasn't. And I don't know if it's because the Russians couldn't follow up on that, or they didn't want to. In other words, they still want to keep up the pressure. I mean, remember too, a couple of weeks ago, we saw a hit on the Cabinet of Ministers building in Kiev by what appeared to be a Russian missile of some sort. And people are saying, okay, is Moscow finally taking the gloves off? Are they going after the regime in Kiev? Well, it turned out they weren't, that they went out of their way to avoid that recognition. Now, maybe they still think they can play Trump, appeal to his vanity, still keep him on the string. Trump, for his part, may actually want to see some improvement of relations with Moscow, but frankly, he hasn't really done any even the things that are well within his power, easily to do. For example, he could declare tomorrow, we're restarting the START negotiations with the Russians. He hasn't done that. He could reopen the consulates that were closed under Obama. He hasn't done that. He could say, I'm ordering a resumption of direct flights between Moscow and Dulles or wherever it might be. He hasn't done that either. So I take with a big grain of salt the idea that his intentions are good. I think in some sense, his intentions are about himself. He wants to be the big winner here. He wants to make peace for the seventh conflict or the 17th conflict, whatever he's claiming nowadays. But again, it gets back to what you said earlier, shifting the burden to the Europeans. And of course, the Europeans are playing ball with that as well. They're all thrashing around trying to look like they're doing something. Trump, I think, is calling their bluff in part to pressure them to put up or shut up, really do what he wants them to do so he can get his fingers out of this mess and let them handle it. But I don't think it amounts to much more than that.
Yeah, I'm with you. And it also goes back to, the point that you made earlier, the question of how much power does Trump actually have here? How much is he making these decisions versus the information that he's getting? And I know people kind of go back and forth on whether they think that, Trump has all of the information, he's fully aware, or whether he's being kept in the dark. In this case, the results seem to be the same from at least what we're seeing. But I also think it's interesting too, because when it comes to the message that they're sending to Russia, I mean, not only has Trump not done anything to back away from this war, but he's continued to escalate it. I mean, signing off on long-range cruise missiles for Ukraine. You also have the Financial Times reporting that Washington is planning to send 33,000 AI-controlled drones to Ukraine with plans to later upgrade them using swarm technology. Now, this tells me that the military-industrial complex is not finished, or not anywhere close to finished, using Ukraine as their sort of playground, trying out some of this technology, right? Trying to see how many Russians they can kill in the process. So, how do you look at that when it comes to the ongoing US involvement? I mean, Trump may talk about, we're, solving this conflict or that conflict, but we're not really seeing any pulling back of the US war machine. Instead, it seems to be business as usual in a number of different conflicts right now.
No, that's right. I mean, if Trump were serious about defending the United States, he'd be pulling these forces back from East Asia, back from Europe, putting them on the southern border, actually dealing with the security needs here in the Western Hemisphere. That doesn't mean, by the way, just going around and sinking Venezuelan fishing boats or something like that. I mean, it actually means looking at what our real security needs along our border are. He's not doing that. But on the other hand, he wants $1 trillion for our so-called defense budget, which of course is not a defense budget at all. It's that's right. It's not even the Department of Defense anymore. It's the Department of War.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to spend a lot of money for capabilities that have very little to do with the defense of the United States. But I think part of that will be this kind of technological upgrade that you're referring to, because I think there's some realization and a lot of actually anxiety in the American establishment that we're behind the 8 ball now, that the Russians clearly, and to some extent even the Chinese, have outclassed us in terms of some very important technology. We've got a lot of catch up to do, assuming we want to carry on that battle with these entities, for which there's no objective reason, but that seems to be what they want to do. The Europeans, on the other hand, are even in worse shape than we are. They're talking about spending a lot more money. But look at what's happening in France right now. I mean, there's all sorts of disorder in France that money is being spent on. What is Macron talking about? Like 400 million euro? That would put France, I guess, like the second biggest spender on military of all the countries in the world after the United States, and well ahead of the Russians and the Chinese. At the same time, the European economies are in miserable shape, in large part because they've been following American diktat over what to do about the war in Ukraine. So, I think there is this desire to try to catch up with the Russians and the Chinese. They're willing to spend lots and lots of money. Whether that will actually accomplish anything, I don't know. Meanwhile, the actual needs of the United States, of the European publics, both economically and socially, and even in terms of their security, are being undermined.
Yeah, it's very telling. And it's also interesting to me too, because this has been the United States' big focus has been war, right? Sure, they're calling it the Department of War now, but for the last few decades now, it has been all about war and the military industrial complex. And yet here we are falling behind. Now, the last thing I want to bring up, because it kind of goes into the realm of what we're talking about and the Trump administration acting like they're all about peace. And yet the Trump administration is the one that is breaking barriers, inviting Al Qaeda to the White House, as you have the HTS regime in Damascus sending its foreign minister to DC to beg for sanctions on Syria to be lifted. Now, you look at this and you go, it's all a show to me, right? What they're doing versus what is actually happening back at home. How do you see it when you have the US literally open arms to Al Qaeda? I mean, they're really not hiding it anymore.
It's just amazing, Rachel, how many Americans, particularly on the conservative side, but even a lot of people on the left too, still think still think that Al Qaeda is our enemy, that we are fighting a war against radical Islamic terrorism and so forth, and do they not understand that Al Qaeda and its 57 flavors have been our proxies from day one. From day one, that we've been using, whether it was in Libya, whether it was in Syria, whether it was in Kosovo, whether it was in Bosnia, all these, and Xinjiang, Afghanistan, we use these crazies as our proxies. And here we basically starved the Syrian people to death for years and years under sanctions till that government finally collapsed. And now that our friends Al Qaeda are in power, we just can't be friendly enough. Oh my goodness, we're going to lift. I know. Look, I'm not in favor of sanctions. I don't think we should have sanctions against anybody. But what does it tell you? That when you had a secular government that was respectful of the various different ethnic and religious groups in Syria, which is a very diverse society, that we have these crazy Al Qaeda types that are, killing Alawites, they're killing Druze, they're killing Christians, and so forth. But we just can't do enough for them. I mean, because they're our buddies. Obviously, there's some friction between the Israelis and the Al Qaeda regime in Damascus, even though they are strategic allies and have been all along, because the Israelis want a lot more. They basically want an occupation zone throughout southern Syria. They're playing, games with the Kurds and with the Druze and so forth. So, just because they're buddies doesn't mean they will necessarily continue to get along. You have the problem now with essentially Turkish and Israeli zones of what amounts to occupation of Syria are essentially now intersecting. There's no real buffer now between them. And that is a marriage that may not last much longer either between Erdogan and Netanyahu. This is a very explosive area. Meanwhile, though, as you say, we're showing our true colors. We don't even hide the fact that Al Qaeda and the most radical, remember, where was the line between Al Qaeda and Daesh, the Islamic State, ISIS? Not much of a line at all. It's the same people, basically. Wasn't that Trump's big argument? Why we're in Syria, we have to fight ISIS. What a load of whatever. I mean, it's just so depressing, though, that so many Americans still don't see through it.
Yeah, exactly. I'm right there with you. And, when you see the commentary that Trump is making lately, when you see what his administration is allowing, it's a reminder that it has been right there in front of us all along. And the American people definitely need to start waking up more and more to what US foreign policy is really about. Certainly a lot at stake here all around. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. Jim Jatras, a geopolitical analyst and former US diplomat, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanction. And just a quick reminder that this weekend marks one whole year of sanctions. So I'm going to be doing a Q&A episode. So if you have some questions and you want some answers, then you can sign up as a paid subscriber right now, and you just might find your question on Sunday's episode. You can do that over on Substack or also on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.